Anyway, it's lovely to be here with everyone. I'm in San Francisco, and most of my Zoom activities are here either in the city or in the greater Bay Area. So it's delightful to stretch my Zoom legs, as it were, and to come over to Colorado. Um, so you all are probably familiar with the Blue Cliff record and case number 14. Yunman is asked, what is the what is the teaching of a whole lifetime? To which he answers, an appropriate response. Sound familiar? Everyone's somewhat familiar with this? You don't have to be. But it's a wonderful teaching. And as I think about my life under any circumstances, but particularly these circumstances, which are somewhat challenging, I find this teaching extremely helpful. Here we are in the world, this crazy, wonderful world of ours, and so many things are going on. We know from a Buddhist perspective, there's always sickness, old age, and death to contend with. And as if that weren't enough, we are currently being peppered with some COVID, a global pandemic, and a little national turbulence. And then all the particulars of our individual lives, right? So as a great Buddhist teacher of mine, Albert Camus, said, to be a human is hard. But I find that, that there is much along the way of the Bodhisattva path of our Buddhist practice that really helps to hold me, and I imagine hold you as well. You know, I think that the first thing that I find very stabilizing is just sitting. You know, this is a radical act we do to just sit still. To take a posture of uprightness, of integrity, of alignment, no matter what's going on in our minds, no matter how we judge it. Just that act alone is singularly radical. To try and calm ourselves, to have calm abiding, to not create more chaos or harm in the world. This is very beneficial. And I think that, you know, as we create that physical posture, our mind and heart come into alignment with it so that we have the opportunity of trying to match our outmost self with our inmost self. All of the Dharma, of course, is enormously helpful, particularly the Eightfold Path, right view, which is kind of the basis of, you know, the real shift in our view, I think, the paradigm of Buddhism that changed my view radically in terms of how I experience life and view what happens in life, but also the more active elements of the Eightfold Path, from right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood. All of these help to hold us and to give us direction in terms of how it is that we can try and find our way toward the appropriate response when times are challenging, either on a personal level or on a more universal level. All of this, these teachings from the Eightfold Noble Path lead us to sila or shila, right? Ethical behavior, learning to be upright, learning to close that cognitive dissonance, if you will, between the inside and the outside, having that integrity, that uniform unity of being. And this is good. This is good teachings, and this holds us steady. This is, as the Buddha said in one of his sutras, a source of great protection. When we live this way, I am protected from harming you and from all of the terrible beating up of self that happens when I don't protect you from me, my unskillfulness, but better still, you are protected from me. So it is a good way to live. But all of this for me is really fueled by and nourished by and directed by something that I think is really important, which is what I wanted to spend most of my time commenting on. And that is our vows and the whole act of vowing. The Oxford Dictionary simply describes vow as a solemn promise. We know from our myriad ceremonies, be they Jukai or full moon ceremonies, all of the places where we do vow taking, this is where we set our intention. Both whether you do this formally or informally, I'm of the opinion that no one can tell you whether you are or you aren't a Buddhist, but you can do it formally as well. This has great power. You know, Dido Laurie talks about in his wonderful book on the precepts, The Heart of Being, that when we vow, we create the karma of that vow. So there's something really mysterious and powerful going on here in this action of setting our intentions. Jan, chosen by, has anyone read her wonderful book, The Vow Powered Life? I recommend it heartily. It's really a lovely book. I think she might be coming out with a new edition, but she has some beautiful things to say about vow. She says, vows act like a conduit for our life energy. If we do not have a clear and underlying purpose for our life energy can become scattered and subject to being frittered away. Vows prevent us from reaching the end of our life and looking back with the sad question, what happened? How did I end up here? She goes on to say that vows keep us from acting unconsciously. So I would posit that that is when we act unconsciously, we're acting out of old karma, old habit energy, unexamined, right? We're just acting out of the force of those habit energies. So vows keep us from acting unconsciously, from becoming puppets jerked around by the karmic causes and effects of life, right? They act as a compass to help us set a clear direction for our lives. She goes on to describe them as an internal GPS system or a gyroscope. She says, vow is actually the power of the bundle of energy purposely formed and propelled through time. The actual power of the bundle of energy purposely formed and propelled through time. How many here have formally taken vow? Several of you, yeah. And how many of you have perhaps, well, I imagine we'll actually be taking vows later tonight, won't we? With the UN, with the 4 Bodhisattva vows, right? Exactly. So even if you haven't participated in a formal ceremony, you're taking vows with the frequency with which you come to Sangha and when you express those 4 Bodhisattva vows. You know, I think our Buddhist lineage in Soto Zen is replete with vow, right? It's just, they're everywhere. In every ceremony, Jukai, priest ordination, Dharma transmission, weddings. I'm always touched, particularly at funerals, when we give somebody the precepts and vows. For me, that's quite lovely. I'm not looking forward to that moment in my life, but I'll be well aided and happy to have it when it comes. So these vows, this whole ineffable, mysterious thing of vow is really very, very powerful. And I have found throughout my life, and I've been practicing Buddhism for about 34 or so years now, I've been astonished at how much I have really come to appreciate living a vow-based life. Early in my life, it was nothing that I knew about beyond marriage vows or something like that, and had no idea the impact that it would have in terms of how it really holds me in my life, every moment of my life, to get to that place where I can embody that appropriate response. One thing that I was very touched by in terms of Chosen Bai's book was she talks about how she came to understand what Maizumi Roshi talked about in terms of vow. So I'm going to read you a little bit of what happened to her, the situation, and how she interpreted it. She said, I did not understand the significance of vows until I heard my original teacher, Maizumi Roshi, speak about them several years after his death. During the almost 20 years I studied with him, he had mentioned vows many times, but somehow the meaning and the importance had escaped me. And then she talks about how she was with some of her students and she wanted to introduce her deceased teacher to her students and to give them a feel for what he was like. And apparently there are very few video clips of him, but she found this one. And this is what she says. We watched a short bit of tape that I had never seen, an interview with a person who was interested in Roshi's views about life and death. The interviewer asked him, Christians believe in a soul that continues after this life. Do Buddhists believe in something permanent that continues after death? Maizumi Roshi considered the question for a moment and then replied, no. Then he added, rather, we believe in the vow. My late teacher's words struck me to the core. I instantly understood what he had been trying for many years to help me understand. I understood the power of vows. I understood that my students and I, sitting together and watching that video, were the tangible result of my late teacher's vows. I understood that when we make a strong vow, we become a force that continues after we die, perhaps forever. Just as fragments of our physical energy, the calcium in our bones, and the carbon in our flesh do not disappear when we die, but go on to form the bodies of new beings. So our psychic energy also continues after death and has an effect on minds and bodies well into the future. Thus, the energy of a strong vow does not die with the person, but moves through time, changing as it is picked up by new people, always continuing to bear fruit. My teacher was a woman by the name of Darlene Cohen, whose first teacher and her heart teacher was the notorious Baker Roshi at San Francisco Zen Center, somebody who struggled with embodying his vows. And if you're not familiar with him, I'll let you go find him on Google and Wikipedia. But he actually created a lot of harm out of his unskillfulness and out of slipping away and not abiding and living his vows. And it took a long time for San Francisco Zen Center to actually heal, and many individual people to heal from the unskillfulness of him breaking his vows. But when Darlene and her husband, Tony, pulled up in their hippie years in front of San Francisco Zen Center in a tricked out hippie VW van, they went inside to examine and to get a tour of San Francisco Zen Center. And as they were coming down the stairs from the second floor where the residences are, they met Suzuki Roshi coming up the stairs. And he just stopped and looked at the two of them and bowed and looked at them and continued up the stairs. And she said to me later, she had no idea what had happened. And she maybe spent 2 years studying, but she was several orbits out from his close students at that time. She said she didn't know what had happened in that encounter, but something had happened that changed the course of her life. She didn't know what he had, but she wanted it. And she spent the rest of her life finding it, embodying it, and sharing it with other people. The power of vow. Suzuki Roshi's vow to Darlene. Many years ago, I was sitting in the Dharma hall, the Buddha hall, where we have Dharma talks at Zen Center. And this short, frumpy, gnarled, matronly woman hobbled in to the Dharma hall. And she had lots of scars on her body from surgeries, I found out later. And she did not do an elegant prostration in front of the beautiful altar because Darlene had rheumatoid arthritis from the time she was 34 and completely crippled. But she did the most heartfelt bow, even though it was just a standing bow in front of the altar with her whole being. I had seen many people give beautiful prostrations, which I appreciated and touched me. But this one just completely rocked me, took hold of me. And watching this woman who I did not know yet bow, a standing bow, not even getting down to her waist, I started to cry. The power of her vow. And from that moment on, she became my teacher. And I have done much what she has tried to do, which is to take what she has felt, what I felt in her, and to try and spread it throughout the world. And I don't say this in any way certainly to put myself in the company of Suzuki Roshi, but I think it's incredible. I mean, sometimes this is the magical, ineffable, but nonetheless palpable way in which vow is transmitted and the power of vow. So when Chosen Bai said she's sitting there with her teacher, with her students, and she understood at last that they were there as the tangible result of his vow, I can just identify. And I'm sure that all of you can identify. Something brought you and you felt something in people who had taken vow and living vow-based lives that inspired you, that wanted you to continue to participate in this, what can we call it? Creation of an energetic field of benefit, creating new Buddha fields of skillfulness in a world that is rather sad and weary and worn and not very skillful at this point in time. So we participate in the energy of vow. We're the recipients of vow, but we also consciously or unconsciously transmit vow. I think that beyond the fact that we set our own vows and we set intention and we start to, as Dido Lori says, create the karma of that vow. And the way Chosen Bai talks about it, almost like we can surf on the energetic fields of our ancestors' vows. I think that there's something in terms of these, as we in these lineages, all going back directly to Shakyamuni Buddha, we can wrap ourselves in these energetic fields of vow. Imagine all the ancestors, known and unknown, in the lineage and not in the lineage, who have lived in vow. And we can summon their vow and that energy. And we can rest in it and we can trust it. And it can come to our aid when times are challenging, when the world seems intractable, challenging, endlessly difficult. Shantideva says, in terms of his book on the way of the Bodhisattva, that the way is quite long. We need all that we can summon to help us, if indeed we're going to stay on this path as bodhisattvas and try and help those who are suffering. At the end of her life, my teacher talked about vow as one of her core teachings, which, of course, obviously resonated very deeply with me. And the imagery she used, she said, vow is like a staff that you can hold in your hands, that you can lean on. And sometimes, when the waters of our lives are just bubbling, meandering, bucolic streams, well, we can still use that staff as we cross, shallow waters or occasionally rocky waters. But we can also use that staff and really rely on it when the waters get raging, when the storms come and they feel like we're going to be swept away. We can plant that vow, that staff of vow, to give us steadiness, to help us find our way again to embodying that appropriate response. So, as Kemo said, being a human is hard, and the way of the Bodhisattva is long. So what is the teaching of a whole lifetime? It is this appropriate response. Or sometimes the appropriate response is just the desire to try and find the appropriate response, right? Perfection is not what is called for. But I deeply, deeply believe that what we do matters. From isolated places where we're sheltering in place to participating in social reckoning of justice and injustice regarding racial issues, gender issues, orientation issues. What we do matters. How we live matters. In the checkout lines of our grocery stores, passing by neighbors, what we do matters. Transmission is going on all the time. We're being transmitted to. We transmit. How will we respond? What will we transmit? I think our vows are always helping us to remember our deepest, truest self, our inmost self, helping us to remember that we want to live upright, awakened lives, helping us to remember that we really do not want to do any harm. Thank you very much.